Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023. Time for another show, another discombobulated show. I've run into an interesting problem today. I've run into a couple of interesting problems so far this morning. Well, for one thing, I've got a new story that's been sent to me by my brother Mark, and the story is I need to come and see him. He's in the hospital. So, okay, everything seems to be, on the mend here, but without violating HIPAA, I guess I can at least say that I'll be thinking about him during the show today, and the fact that I probably will have to scoot pretty quick afterwards once there's clearance to go and visit him, and so my mind will be elsewhere. It's one of those things that happens from time to time, and I think we will go and deal with it. On a smaller scale, I can tell you that the music that we used to hold the place open, hold the stream open prior to launching the show has run into a hiccup, a very annoying hiccup at that. I wonder if I can fix this by, at any rate, my long introductory music that I use to kind of hold the stream open as I prepare everything else that needs to be prepared during the morning has been inadvertently deleted from Soundboard, and it is not easy to get it back in there. And so I played it through another application today just so that there would be some music there, but then there's this weird abrupt cutoff. It was all set before where we could smoothly transition. Not that I ever smoothly transitioned. So anyway, now we're a couple seconds behind, and what can you do? It's going to create an editing nightmare. But at least I'm not being indicted in 17 different jurisdictions like the former guy, except so far we haven't seen that actually happening yet. But I don't know. I think the big story yesterday was that Donald Trump told everybody that it was going to happen Tuesday, and you know how it is with Donald Trump. Soon, very soon, 2 weeks in a very short period of time. So, I don't know if it matters too much whether it happens on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but the indictment watch continues, and we'll all wait and see, and I don't think anything in particular happens. He gets indicted. I don't think he's going to be there. I guess he has to have an arraignment if there are criminal charges. So, at some point there'll be something. But anyway, I don't know what the circumstances are. Nobody ever has to usually arraign former presidents. But it's resulting in a raft of stories. I didn't save them all, but I do see people trying to attempt to answer the questions of like, what does the Secret Service do if if law enforcement authorities come to either serve a warrant or take you in for an arraignment, and maybe you don't want to go. You're in Florida. You're supposed to be arraigned in New York. There's an extradition issue. There's the issue of the Secret Service is protecting this guy. They probably shouldn't, but they have a mandate to do so. So all sorts of fun things going on and all sorts of legal problems that we need to see how they play out. It's exciting times. We'll now get an answer, finally, to the burning question of what do you do when you have to arrest a person who's under current Secret Service protection and they don't feel like going. We just never imagined we would be here, but then Donald Trump got elected, and pretty much as soon as he declared, well, not as soon as he declared his candidacy, but as soon as it was clear that he could actually become president, which really wasn't until after the election in 2016, honestly, nobody thought it would work that way. So for coming up on, 6-7 years now, we've all been wondering, what's it going to be like when they have to arrest a guy who is, by law, still entitled to Secret Service protection at the time that he is served with his arrest warrant. Exciting. Okay, so Greg Dworkin is here. We'll probably never find out what we have to do to arrest that guy because he stays out of trouble. And, it's a good way to live, right, Greg?
I think so. But, it's pretty clear what you do if the Secret Service is involved. You send the marshal of the Supreme Court because they outrank everybody.
Think about that. Imaginary people with imaginary missions. There is a marshal, but That's not usually what they do, but okay.
Yeah. Or
I'd
you
send
could,
one.
And therefore,
Send
once
two.
the marshal is there, they declare martial law.
Right.
M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L.
Right, and then
There's a whole history of it. Just Google it. I'm not making this stuff up.
okay.
I wonder whatever happened to that lady.
I don't know. She probably got.
She was a
lost on
Twitter
her way
influencer.
Yeah.
Like everybody followed her as if she knew what she was talking about somehow.
Yeah. I don't even remember which lady it was, so I can't check. So.
No, the British lady who was
right.
commenting on American history, whose name I don't remember.
Yeah. Louise. Was that her name? Louise.
Yeah, Louise
Mensch.
Mensch. Lucy von Pelt, something like that.
That's right. Well, she had the same move with the football. Anyway, yeah, Louise. I guess I could go look that up. But that's only if I'm not paying attention to your stories, which I'd rather do.
But the point is, like, nothing is forever.
That's true, especially on social media. It usually lasts about 15 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. So my leadoff story on the Pundit Roundup today.
I accidentally deleted it. Sorry.
The Pundit Roundup?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's okay. Nobody reads it anyway, so you're fine.
I deleted my music. I deleted everything. Okay.
Yeah. Indictment Day, maybe. We'll see. But there's a lovely piece here from Alex Burns, who used to write for the New York Times and now writes for Politico.
Okay. That is lovely for him.
Who says, stop overthinking it. An indictment would be bad for Trump.
Really? Yeah, you have to say that now.
And the reason he had to write that
right.
is that there were so many dumb things floating around.
Sure.
About, and Byron York, for example, one of the enablers.
Yes.
Saying, well, it's ridiculous that Trump would be indicted by a deep blue Manhattan jury.
In fact, it would not be. But all right.
I think about what he's saying. I mean, there's certainly a ranking.
I don't see anything better now.
Cases in terms of what you think is the most serious.
Yes.
The January 6th one at top. Or maybe Georgia, because that's pretty serious too. And what you think is going to be the most likely to nail him. And that's probably Mar-a-Lago. More on that.
Okay.
And it could be some overnight stuff.
Oh.
But
overnight oats.
The point Byron York is making is that this is the flimsiest of all the cases. Well, first of all the cases. And secondly, the fact that this is the flimsiest of all the cases is probably not the argument you think it is.
Out of the 25 indictments he faces in 17 different jurisdictions, this is the flimsiest.
Right? And so that is somehow defending him.
Right, okay.
And so, my point this morning was, that means, logically, if you follow it, that when he gets indicted for something else, you're going to say, now that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, right. That one murder that he did is probably, as murders go, the least important.
Yeah, he only killed one person. On the other, this is the trolley problem.
Yeah.
Right? And he only killed one person. But, when he went the other way,
we should be doing the mass murder
trolley up
first.
And then he went down the other track and got all of them on the other side.
Right. And then he stole the trolley.
That's an indictment.
On top of it all. Yeah, okay. Well, Byron York, he is what he is.
That puts the whole thing in perspective. It's an indictment.
Right.
It's bad. You're not
good for John
to be
McCain,
indicted.
but it's bad for... It is. Yeah. All right. So, Byron York, something. There you have it. A pundit rounded up.
Somebody asked me when I tweeted that, are you subtweeting Byron York? And I said, well, it'd be irresponsible not to speculate.
I guess. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, who cares? Byron York. I'm subtweeting.
It's just funny
his hair.
because, it doesn't matter what, they're still enablers. They'll find some excuse for saying, well, he's not going to get indicted. Okay, he got indicted, but it's not as bad as you think it is because what he did isn't as bad as you think it is. It's not as bad as the other things he could have been indicted for, but wasn't. Okay, well, he's going to be indicted for those too.
Yeah. Well, all right. So don't overthink it. Okay. So I won't overthink whether or not an indictment is bad.
So Alex Burns points out, Alexander Burns, that the Trump diehards can indeed be expected to rise up against Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. In fact, I think there were 4 of them on Monday.
Yeah. they're rising. It's a good bet that there aren't going to be a whole lot of super MAGA people on the street.
Right, and
in
that's
New York.
partly because they all think that it's a Antifa plant. That
right.
What's happening is
that's right.
Is that and they got over conspiratorial about it. But
don't overthink it.
Alexander Burns' point is that doesn't earn him a single additional vote.
No,
if
no
every Trump voter who voted for him last time votes for him this time, but nobody else does, he loses.
Yes, right. I mean, he claims that he won, but that he was going to do that anyway. So
right. Look,
all right.
The thought generates itself by reflex in America's political brain. It's a habit forged in 2016 when Trump defied terminal prognoses to defeat Hillary Clinton. And it's not irrational speculation. Americans have a history of sticking with flamboyant politicians with more than a passing relationship with the criminal justice system, whether it's Marion Barry in D.C., Edwin Edwards in Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that could get him out of office is finding him in bed with a dead girl or a live boy. That was a great political line. I mean, it's going to be hard to find people more colorful than Edwin Edwards. But Trump is a character from a similar mold with an even tighter grip on his followers that verges at times on the quasi-mystical. At another point in his political life, maybe Trump could have turned this case into rich barter for a comeback. And then you read about how he wants the perp walk. He really, really wants to be led into the courthouse, handcuffed behind his, hands behind his back, so he could be the martyr.
All right.
And he's trying to decide with his handlers whether or not he should be smiling when they take his mugshot.
I see.
I don't know
Sure.
if they let him put all that orange crap on. Or the bronzer.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's some other orange crap I think
jumpsuit,
you should
and
have to put
I
on.
don't know if it clashes, so
right.
I don't know if it's like a really good idea.
That would really be something that could blow out your lens.
But it's not going to be a frog march. They're not going to do that. This is white-collar crime.
Oh, man, come on.
And he certainly, even if now the grand jury didn't meet yesterday, it does meet today. Apparently there's one last witness.
Ah, okay. One last witness.
But they could handle
say?
that in an hour or two this morning and then make an indictment by this afternoon. So it's not guaranteed that today's indictment day, but today's probably the first day that it could happen. Well, you could say that because it hasn't happened up until now.
Yesterday is no longer the first day it could
happen. Well, we know that he wasn't getting indicted yesterday for two reasons. One is he wanted to, and the other is that the grand jury didn't meet.
Yeah, I mean, if the place is closed, you're going to have to wait. Okay. Yeah.
And so Alex Burns points out, not now. For all of his unusual strength, Trump is defined these days more by his weakness, personal and political deficiencies that have grown with time and now figure to undermine any attempt to exploit the criminal case against him. His base of support is too small. Thank you for saying that. I don't know how many times we said that on his show. Why are you talking to them? You can't convince his base. His base is not going to move. His base is small. Yes. That's not who we're talking to. That's not who we're talking about.
They don't understand us anyway.
You're not going to get committed evangelicals who want to go back to 1950 to somehow see the light. That's not the point. That base of support is still too small for him to win.
Real light anyway.
Unless you're talking about individual states. Like Indiana.
Oh.
His political imagination too depleted and his instinct for self-absorption too overwhelming for him to marshal a broad, lasting backlash. His determination to look inward and backward has been a problem for the campaign, and actually I would add for the party, even without the indictment. And it'll be a bigger one if and when he's indicted. So that's all true. Personality cult politics on its own have never really been a winning model for Trump. At his strongest moments, he's convinced voters that Trumpism is about them.
Yes.
The most memorable moment in his convention speech that year was when he declared the U.S. was horrifyingly broken and I alone can fix it. His critics rightly saw it as a telling display of a narcissistic and authoritarian mindset, but the bit in that speech that best conveyed Trump's appeal was one taking aim at the Clinton catchphrase, "I'm with her." He said, "I choose to recite a different pledge. My pledge reads, I'm with you."
I see.
Suddenly, Clinton was the self-absorbed one, and he was the tribune of the plebs.
Yeah. Maybe, yes. It was a play.
So it's hard for a candidate to tell voters I'm with you when he's mainly consumed with narrow personal complaints and crackpot conspiracy theories. Plenty of Americans can see themselves in an older white man scorned by liberals and the media for his crude manner and bigoted ideas. Plenty Americans, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But fewer are likely to see themselves in a wealthy husband paying hush money to conceal his debauched sex life and whining about the unfairness of his circumstances in every public outing.
Yeah.
Especially after you lost.
True also. But that's a good point, too, about how, this is the weakest case or whatever. But it's actually the one that will, there's the least room for even, supporters to say, yeah, haven't we all? Or this is fake.
Again,
or,
looking at Trump supporters is like looking at conservatism writ large.
Okay.
Right? There's 3 or 5 people, maybe a dozen, perhaps a score, who actually believe in it. And everybody else is, well, that fits what I'm trying to get to here, so I'll go along.
Yeah.
Is Trump a conservative? Is he winning? I'm a conservative.
Okay.
Are you a true conservative who believes in, all the things that conservatives believe in, small government, limited? Well, no, I'm for Trump. I'm for Trump, not the party.
Right.
Well, what are you, really? I'm a winner. That's what I am.
You bet. Sure.
And it's the same with his support. I mean, are they really for him? Or are they just for owning the libs and winning? And if what you're doing is not owning the libs and winning, are they still for you? And he's about to find out.
Yeah. Okay. Cool, I guess.
Now, Bill Clinton, Alex Burns writes, survived impeachment and finished his second term as a popular president by persuading voters he was balancing budgets and keeping them safe while Newt Gingrich and Ken Starr were going through his underwear drawer.
They were.
More recently, Ralph Northam overcame a blackface scandal and completed his term by promising to devote himself to fighting racial inequality.
Okay.
One civil rights leader in Richmond captured the appeal of this approach, telling the Christian Science Monitor of Northam's critics, they want to continue to talk about yesterday. I want to talk about tomorrow.
I see.
Again, that is a winning strategy.
Yeah. I mean, it can be done.
Democrats should take that.
He didn't win anything. He had his one term, and that was it. But there was nothing to be won.
The thing is, Trump doesn't have much to say about things that really matter. But he wasn't forced out of office. There was a time when that broke that you thought that maybe he would.
Yes.
Except it turned out the lieutenant governor wasn't so great either, so that didn't work out.
Right. So you were kind of like,
had you had a stellar lieutenant governor at the time, Northam might well have been forced out.
Right. That's entirely possible.
Now, I'm no expert on Virginia politics, mind you, but from afar, that's the way it looked to me.
I think it's a sensible thing to guess. What the hell? We might as well speculate. You know what would happen if you didn't.
Yeah, I'd be irresponsible. So, unlike the Trump of 2016, who shattered the policy orthodoxy of the GOP establishment and reshaped the party's ideology, the Trump of today contributes nothing new to the Republican agenda. And again, I would step back and say, look, Trump lost, therefore, you have to look at every move he makes as asking the question, is he increasing the number of people willing to vote for him?
Mm-hmm.
And, the point has been made, and I've made the point, and other people have made the point. Not one single voter is being convinced by what Trump is doing that he didn't already have.
Yes.
Right? He's fighting to keep what he has.
And
true. Part of the discussions about politics and whether it's good for this person or bad for this person is sort of based on people talking past each other. Mm-hmm. Republicans and independents and pundits who are serious about trying to analyze this are looking at the GOP primary. Real people, normal people, us, Democrats, are saying, I don't really care about the Republican primary. They're all a bunch of wackos. The question is, how does he do in the general? So is this good for Trump? Say the pundits, and we say, of course it isn't. And they say, wait, how is it going to hurt him in the Republican primary? And we say, you don't care.
Yeah, all right, I got you.
And they say, well, I got columns to publish. I got a lot of stuff to fill between now and when the,
And that one
so
comes
of
first.
Course you have to care. Actually, no, we don't.
I mean, it's an interesting story that there might be a criminal running.
Yeah, but ultimately, I don't really care.
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder, right? That he's working from a base that wasn't enough to win last time, and there's just nothing about either what he's speaking about, if he were talking about policy, or what passes for policy. That doesn't seem to be winning anybody over, and it's also going to be difficult to say that your base grows while you're defending yourself from criminal charges.
Right. Now, the other side of the coin, of course, is looking to see how the media covers all of this.
Yes.
And again, part of it is they have to be focused on the Republican primary. They have to pretend that that's important. And in some senses, it is important. I mean, it's one of the two great political parties in this country, and so you have to cover it. It's news. Sure, I get that. Yeah. You do indeed have to fill columns, but you don't have to be the New York Times. This is Michael Bender writing this morning. The circus continues for Trump. Legal woes resurrect old habits. The former president strengthened his political position in recent weeks. Again, he's talking about the primary. Doesn't say it. But if you just read it, you'd think that Trump is on his way to getting reelected.
Yeah.
But an impetuous response to his potential indictment could alienate voters he will need to win back the White House. Again, is he talking about the primary, or is he talking about the general election? Well, in this case, it's both, but it's fairly ambiguous. But just to set the scene here, listen to his first paragraph, which made me barf this morning. Donald J. Trump, the former primetime reality TV star known for his love of big stages and vast crowds, has embraced a more humbling and traditional style on the campaign trail in recent months. Humbling.
All right. I'm ready to vomit now.
Humbling. Why didn't they use earnest? Or more professorial.
Oh.
Or other things that would be equally stupid.
Yeah. I mean, well, today is the day he finally became president.
You got that one somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wait a minute. I have it. I have to click through about 10,000 different things here, but there we go.
What the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
Yeah.
I mean, the point is he doesn't have any money. These big rallies cost money. He needs every penny for his legal defense. Come on, man.
Right. And anything he doesn't use on his legal defense, he has to steal. Don't forget that he has to put that money in his pockets.
And he hasn't paid all of these same venues for the last time he was there.
Right.
They're not going to give him space without getting paid.
No.
Not this time. They know what happens.
Well, I wonder about that. I think they might be doing that already.
No, they pick different venues.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right. Yeah. I guess you run out of venues at some point, maybe?
Yeah, well, he's got a couple of cycles to go before that.
All right, so he can continue.
He held intimate events in New Hampshire and South Carolina. He fielded questions from voters in Iowa. Part of the reason for that, I think, is to, make the point that people love me up close, and they won't give DeSantis their babies to kiss because they're afraid he'll eat them.
Yes, well, that is an issue. It's good.
And in multiple cities, he surprised diners with unannounced visits to restaurants where, with his more familiar Trumpian flair, he made a dramatic show of sliding a wad of cash from his pocket to buy everybody a bite to eat.
Ah, how nice.
This strategy has highlighted the billionaire's counterintuitive political strength at connecting with voters on a personal level, underscoring the chief weakness of his main potential Republican rival, Ron DeSantis of Florida. Now, don't forget, my working theory here is that Trump wants to play up indictment because it makes Ron DeSantis have to support him. So there's every reason for him to want a perp walk. There's every reason for him to want to be indicted yesterday. He was making it up, but, he's not stupid in that sense. He's certainly cunning enough to understand that that's the best way to get DeSantis. Yeah, you can put out the...
it's amazing.
In the Bush era, you would whisper campaign about John McCain and his family.
Yes.
In the Trump era, you just outright say it. So he's accused DeSantis of being a groomer and perhaps not being a real man. And maybe he's a little limp wrist. He's using all the offensive stereotypes as possible deliberately.
Get them all in, I guess.
Yeah. I'm not endorsing him, and I'm not casually throwing out stuff like that because it's okay to say. It's not okay to say. He's deliberately doing it. And then at the same time, he's saying, but by the way, a real man like me can connect with people on a personal level, and Ron DeSantis can't. Meatball Ron DeSanctimonious can't do that.
That might not be the reason.
So we know that DeSantis is dropping in the polls. We know that the media wants a food fight between them. Axios has a piece this morning, something along the lines of this. DeSantis hits back, which he really doesn't, say anything particularly important, any more than Mike Pence did. And so they're afraid of Trump and they're afraid of his voters. And they are still in the situation where they haven't really attacked him yet. And so that's one of the many, many reasons why it's so fascinating to see how this plays out, if and when he's indicted, if and when that's today.
Yes, if and when that's today. Yeah. Okay, by the way, as far as a food fight between DeSantis and Trump goes, I wouldn't bet on it. I don't think they're going to waste food, either of them together. I just find that hard to believe.
So here's Mike Allen's story this morning. And Mike Allen is a good reporter to get a sense of what the pack of reporters are thinking.
Okay.
DeSantis takes direct shot at Trump ahead of possible indictment. New York Post has Ron hits Don.
All right, Post. Not too bad.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis took direct shots at the competence and character of Donald Trump, his likely rival. It's not important for me to be fighting with people on social media, DeSantis said.
True. It's not.
You really want to look at people like our founding fathers. It's not saying you don't ever make a mistake in your personal life, but I think, what type of character are you bringing?
Okay.
Right? That's attacking. I mean, I'm giving you the hard.
Oh, I see. Oh, I'm like, all right, I'm waiting for something like fun to happen.
I placed
that's the whole
loyalty to the
point.
cause over loyalty to me, Ron DeSantis wrote in his book. I had no desire to be flattered.
Okay.
Wow, that really hurts.
Yeah, kick him when he's down, why don't you? Man. Okay, well, whatever, man. Smurf boots, Smurf fight. I guess it's just not going to be like that for a while. All right. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kgrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Has Trump been indicted?
I don't know. Not yet, I don't think.
Okay. Well, waiting around just to see what comes next. But so far, no word on that. The difference, of course, between Twitter and Mastodon, as far as I can tell, is if he gets indicted, Twitter will tell you, Mastodon will not. This is basically what it is. But they will tell you that you can start your own server to find out if you want to.
Right. And I find myself on Mastodon less and less. It's nice to have a backup for when Twitter collapses, but you can't really use it for like breaking news. At least I can't. I can't use it to have it tell me what breaking news is going on at the moment.
And you can, I think you have to do a little more work building the inputs into your feed than you did with
months.
Twitter. But yeah, it takes a while. I do feel like I'm
working on it. I'm doing the work, but it's just not there yet.
That's okay. We can continue.
Same is true with Spoutable, which I'm also on, and also Post, which I'm also on. And none of them really do what Twitter does, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So here's some other things that happened
maybe
overnight.
Twitter will stop doing it. Yeah.
And they all have to do with Donald Trump and indictment.
All right.
As everybody knows, there's other things going on, perhaps even more important in regard to what Trump did or didn't do. He didn't turn over documents when he was supposed to. He did get himself involved with January 6th. For example, he did try to RICO his way out of a Georgia loss. All of those are more important. But two things. First of all, with the Jack Smith Mar-a-Lago stuff, the one that's most likely to actually get him indicted and convicted, in my humble non-lawyer opinion, An appeals court, and that's because it's all about documents. It's a documented case about documents, and the documentation is pretty clear. But part of the documentation...
Make a documentary about it.
Yeah, is that Trump attorney Evan Corcoran was involved in attesting to the fact that now Trump has done everything he was supposed to. And there's, stories going around that, well, Trump lied to him.
Yes, well, he did.
Well, Beryl Howell, who was the chief judge looking at the case, said there's a crime fraud exception here. There's a probable crime, and so Evan Corcoran has to testify, and all of Evan Corcoran's notes have to be turned over. Yes. Trump appealed, and the appeals court last night said that Trump's appeal has to be in by midnight, and the government's response has to be in by 6 a.m.
Oh, wow. All right. Late night.
They've done this before and ruled the same day. So
all right.
This is not going to sit there for 9 months.
That's nice. That's
so
good.
Here's
to
Kyle
what
Cheney
he's doing.
From Politico describing, senior legal affairs reporter for Politico.
Oh, I didn't realize.
An appeals court panel has temporarily blocked Judge Howell's crime fraud order against Trump attorney Evan Corcoran, but set a series of rapid deadlines, including at midnight tonight and 6 a.m. tomorrow. To resolve the matter, Trump lawyers made 2 midnight filings to stave off an effort by DOJ to pierce Trump's attorney-client privilege. At 5:36 a.m., DOJ filed a 6,400-word response, meeting the appeals court's 6 a.m. deadline. What happens next? Presumably, the appeals court will rule pretty quickly before noon, maybe even before 9 a.m. I haven't seen anything yet about that. Keep an eye out for Trump lawyers appearing at the federal courthouse today, and possibly even for Corcoran to testify. So that's where it stands. They have worked relatively quickly in the past on stuff like this.
That's nice.
So the appeals court panel dealing with this issue, Cornelia Pilliard, and this is what's so weird about the justice system in the era of Trump. You have to look and see who appointed the judges.
Yes.
It was not the case in the past that if you didn't know that, then it mattered.
I was passing that knowledge on my son in his government class, discussing the judiciary and reading some stories, and I was saying, they didn't always used to have to tell you who appointed the judges that are
it used to
cases.
not matter. Now it matters.
Right.
The appeals court panel dealing with the issue are Cornelia Pillard, Obama, Michelle Childs, Biden, and Florence Pan, Biden. And an inverse of last month's appeals panel that heard the Scott Perry case, Rao, Trump, Katsas, Trump, and Henderson, Bush won.
Yeah, not great.
In layman's terms, Judge Howell ruled Friday that Evan Corcoran's communications with Trump likely reveal evidence of a crime, invalidating attorney-client privilege. Yes. The appeals court agreed to a very briefly block Howell's order to consider emergency appeal. At midnight, Trump has to answer. At 6 a.m., Jack Smith must reply. For those saying they've never seen the appeal court move this fast, they came pretty close in October when Trump tried to block Mark Short and Greg Jacob from testifying. Mark Short was Mark Meadows' chief of staff. Greg Jacob was a House lawyer for the White House, OLC, I think.
Oh, all right.
Office of Legal Counsel, which represents the White House, as I'm told, not the president. Anyway, he lost the emergency appeal and Short testified the next day. Okay. So these things can work fast.
Yes, I think it's a pretty safe bet. I saw somebody say this is the court signaling. We know that Trump's MO is to appeal delay.
We're not going to let it happen.
Right. This is a very simple and cut and dried legal issue. You either know what you're talking about or you don't. You can do it by midnight. If you can't, then you don't know what you're talking about and you'll lose.
But, again, I would point out it's news.
Yeah.
When he loses his appeal, it's news.
Yeah.
Whatever indictment the DA in Manhattan does, it's within the context of Trump lost again in court on something else.
Yes.
A reminder that he's going to lose in court a lot, and there's going to be a lot of other court stuff. And so it's very difficult for the Republicans to try and just focus on this one indictment. Yeah, you can get some credulous media to go along with it. But the fact is, indictment stuff from other places is going to be all over the news.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't stop that. So good luck.
Basically, I'm saying yes.
Yeah. Hold back the tides, Byron York. Do your best.
All right. Put your hair in the
Exclusive,
way.
says CNN Politics, in a different issue, but this is more on the Stormy Daniels front. Communications between Stormy Daniels and Trump attorney, in this case a fellow named Joe Tacopina, who went on Ari Melber's show and tried to grab papers out of his hand.
That doesn't sound as good.
New York
when
lawyer.
You say it. Yeah, okay, I know the
Basically
guy.
tries to intimidate you. Communications between Stormy Daniels and Trump attorney turned over to Manhattan DA. What's the story here? The story is there was a time back in 2018 when Stormy Daniels was looking for a lawyer and contacted Joe Tacopina.
Oh, really?
And Tacopina did a consult as to whether or not he would represent her and decided not to. But the fact that they don't represent each other doesn't matter. The ethics of lawyerism is that if you as a lawyer take a consult from somebody and discuss private, personal, confidential information and then say, oh, I'm not taking this case.
Right.
You can't use that later. Well, now
the
this
conversation,
lawyer,
right, okay.
Tacopina, is representing Trump in the Stormy Daniels case.
Yes.
And the question is, well, is he using information that he gleaned from the back and forth back in 2018 in an inappropriate way, and shouldn't he just be like recused from the whole situation? And so the conversation on Stormy Daniels' end, her possession of the emails with Tacopina, et cetera, whatever it is she has, has been turned over to the Manhattan DA, who gets to look at it and decide whether it's appropriate for Tacopina to be on the case in the Manhattan DA's opinion.
I see.
And he then turns it over to the judge for non-biased, impartial ruling as to whether this crook should be allowed to,
Well, that's a new twist. Yesterday I had found video of Tacopina on CNN in 2018, basically outlining how serious the charges were against Trump.
And how would he know?
Kind of
because he was involved in it at the time.
Well, he would. I mean, he would. At the time that we listened, we didn't know that I didn't know that he had been consulting with Stormy Daniels.
Because it's CNN.
He was
they don't tell you anything.
Yeah, I guess not. And he didn't tell them probably. But, as a lawyer, can he say how serious it is? Yeah,
they don't tell you Chris Cuomo's Andrew Cuomo's brother.
That is true, too.
You got to figure it out on your own.
All right. Well, good thing somebody did it.
CNN has not seen the records in question, they say, but legal ethics experts CNN spoke with said they could lead to limits being placed on the role Tacopina can play at trial or even his disqualification. The impact that the disclosure will have on the case will depend on the circumstance and the substance of the communication, the ethics expert said. Tacopina said, I never even spoke to her. Well, if you communicated by email, who cares that you never even spoke to her? It's a lawyerly kind of thing that makes no sense. It doesn't help you one way or the other.
Right. Well, it's certainly could present
it's
a
true
ethics
and
problem.
Immaterial.
Yeah, and it's apparently I learned this in law school.
Objection overruled.
The play to do especially in smaller markets doesn't work as well usually in New York, but it's a divorce law ploy. If you're in a small enough market or town that occasionally one party to a divorce might intentionally consult with several lawyers with no intention of hiring all of them or even any of them, but rather to, when you make your selection, finally choose a lawyer, all the other lawyers with whom you've consulted are conflicted out of taking your spouse's case, and they get stuck without a lawyer and have to go shopping somewhere else. I've never heard of it being done in New York, like the idea of taking up every single lawyer that there is, but but that does raise the issue. That's where I first sort of learned about the ethics of that, and you're taught in no uncertain terms. Yeah, you really at that point when the next person comes along and wants you to take the other side of the case, you should just avoid the problem. Say no.
Well,
but not Tacopina.
So Tacopina in that 2018 clip you may have seen,
referenced
something about I'd like to say more, but I can't because of attorney-client privilege.
I have not heard that.
And if he didn't get involved with Stormy Daniels, why in that clip did he say attorney-client privilege?
I don't know. Did he say that? I didn't see it in that
I can't
clip,
really
but-
talk about my impressions or any conversations we've
All
had
right.
because there's an attorney-client privilege that attaches even to a consultation,
That is
Tacopina
true.
said in 2018.
He didn't say it in the little clip that I saw, but that's true. He did learn that lesson somewhere along the line, law school or continuing legal education. Then he ignored it after that.
As the old interview clip began making the rounds, Tacopina's firm issued a statement said there was no attorney-client relationship, a point Tacopina stands by today. He said his comments lack clarity. He was speaking
They
of the
do
general
now.
notion, not the specifics.
Beep, 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 beep. That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like, oh, you must be a lawyer.
Yeah, well, okay.
You just said something, and it's probably like the words are true, but
Right.
make no sense and is not relevant to what I just saw with my own eyes.
Party of the first part. Yada, yada. Okay. Well, all right. That's interesting. So he
Not
may
that
have
I
a
don't have
legal
respect for lawyers,
/
mind
ethical
you.
problem.
But I have to tell you, this whole Trump thing has
think
given
you're
the
kidding.
lawyerly profession something of a hit in terms of public confidence.
Yeah, well, like we know, everything Trump touches dies, and the respect for the legal profession is something he's been touching extensively, and it dies too. And Stormy Daniels, take your vitamins because he touched you, and you don't want to die.
Right. So the state of, I guess this is common practice. It's probably not a law. But it's the way judges decide. Tacopina would not be allowed to use any information he obtained from Daniels in the communications against her as a witness, according to legal experts, and there could be an effort to screen what he knows off from the rest of the Trump team.
Yes, that
Now-
would be a legal matter. Yes,
Why?
evidentiary.
Is it a law
Yeah.
or is it a common practice?
It's certainly within the ethical canons, and then I think it would
Are
probably
the ethical canons a law or a common practice?
as far as a judge and a lawyer are concerned, yes, they would have the force. You could be disbarred and also I think it's probably not directly enshrined in law, but I think evidentiary laws, which obviously are, could be used to exclude his any evidence or his inclusion in the case. You know, you could just say there's an obvious risk of taint, and I can't allow his
Look,
evidence
I'm not
to
a
be
lawyer,
included.
but what if Stormy Daniels' team says, I want Tacopina on the stand to testify?
Yeah, well,
You can't testify and also be like on the other side's legal team. So it's one or the other. Which is it, bud?
well, it certainly makes for a lot of problems, and yeah, I think they have a legal grounds from which to make a real problem for him, and even if he somehow manages to escape the problem, it's usually in the normal course of events not good for your client if you are the news. If you're the lawyer here, if the lawyer is the news, that's a problem. Except possibly in the case of Donald Trump, where nothing seems to matter.
Right.
But
So one expert at the end of the CNN piece says, look, it's possible that prosecutors would ask that Trump waive any potential conflict so he could not raise the conflict as an issue if he's charged and convicted and wants to appeal. I love stories that cut to the chase and that's all interesting. But the real import here is that when he's convicted, it takes his appeal away.
yeah, I mean,
Okay. Well,
he may
thanks.
think that it doesn't. I mean, he may think, of
Well,
course
he
I'm
may
going to
think
have an
that talking
appeal.
to
I had
lawyers
a conflicted
protects anything
lawyer.
he ever says to them.
Yes, he does believe that, and that's technically
He
wrong.
believes a lot of things.
Right. So he usually
Anyway, it's up to the judge.
Yeah.
So, whether it's a rule
What a
or
mess.
whether it's a law, which is a question I often ask you on this show because I'm never clear,
it's sometimes
or whether
both.
it's common practice and it's just the way it happens. Fact of the matter is, judge gets to decide. He who has the gavel, and in this case,
Yeah.
it's like a really big one, gets to decide for an individual case what's going on here. And if you don't like it, you can appeal to the parliamentarian or the marshal of the Supreme Court or the appeals court.
Yeah. Next case. Next
level
court up. Okay. But so far they're not giving you any breaks, and they're making you answer in 6 hours. So
Right.
not great. Oh, but this would be the New York one. So there you go to the Court of Appeals.
There you go to the Court of Appeals, which we know about because Kathy Hochul can't put anybody she wants on the court, which she
That's
just
right.
found out.
Okay.
All right, let's change subjects just a little. I don't know if I have a lot more. Is this one, Ryan Goodman and Andrew Weissman writing in the New York Times.
Again,
Make
New
no
York
mistake,
Times.
the investigation of Donald Trump and the Stormy Daniels scheme is serious.
Okay. I
Though
believe
it may
it.
be tempting to do so, Byron York.
Yeah.
It is a mistake to assess the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation of Donald Trump by comparing its relative severity with those of myriad other crimes.
Okay.
That's not how state and federal prosecutors will or should be thinking about the issue. Prosecutors are trained to consider whether a case can be brought and whether it should be brought.
Yes.
And so that's what they'll do.
Yeah, I know. I guess the approach that a lot of the critics are making is, well, it shouldn't be brought because really at bottom it's only about
it's only number 6 on the
relationship
list
that they have.
and you're only allowed to bring the top 5
right.
because it's not a law, it's a rule.
But people have gone to jail in this case already, and I don't see why the guy who did the dirty stuff shouldn't also go to jail for it.
Right, exactly. So let's change gears here and talk not about Ron DeSantis, but somebody else who's apparently running for president, whether they say so or not. Mike Pence.
Oh.
That's a good lead-in into this Atlantic piece by McKay Coppins.
Oh, Atlantic, eh, McKay?
Nobody likes Mike Pence. That's the title of the piece.
He's batting 100 at the Atlantic so far.
Batting 1,000.
Right. No. He's batting 100. He really sucks. It sounds good until you realize, oh, yeah, wait a second. Right. Batting 1,000, that's the actual term. What's the
in
one
focus
that,
groups,
throw
Republican
the
voters
basketball
are
through the
brutal
ring?
in their assessment of the former vice president. Ask a Republican voter about the former vice president, who's hovering between 6 and 7%. You're likely to hear some of the most withering commentary you've ever encountered about a politician. I don't know if they've covered the Arizona focus groups about Blake Edwards. They were pretty withering.
Yeah, okay.
I've been covering Pence's strange Trump-era arc since 2017 when I first profiled him in The Atlantic. By some accounts, he's wanted to be president since his college fraternity days. I've always been skeptical of his chances, but now that he finally seems ready to run, I want to understand the appeal. So my goal was to see if I could find at least one Pence supporter. Instead,
Mrs. Pence. Yeah, he's just not allowed to be in the room with her. That's the problem.
I have this. Here are some of the quotes I jotted down.
Okay. Didn't find any of those. Did find this.
I didn't find exactly. I didn't find any of those, but I got some great quotes for you.
Atlantic since that time, since 2017. I missed the whole thing. Okay. What were the quotes that he got?
Quote, I don't care for him. He's just middle of the road to me. If there was somebody halfway better, I wouldn't vote for him.
Halfway better than middle of the road.
Yeah. He's alienated every Republican and Democrat. It's over. It's retirement time. Here's the good one. He's only going to get the vote from his family, and I'm not even sure if they like him.
See, there we are. Right. I mean,
he just needs to go away. These are the things that people were saying about him. It went on and on like that across 4 different focus groups. Of the 34 Republicans who participated, I heard only 4 people say they'd even consider him, and 2 of them immediately started talking themselves out of it.
That's pretty good. I would think, but maybe I wouldn't. That was the quote. Really? Okay.
Right. Although the sentiment expressed in the focus groups wasn't quite so violent as January 6th, the anger was still present. During one session, 3 people, all of whom have reported very favorable reviews on Trump, took turns trashing Pence for what they saw as his weakness. Yeah, I'm so mad at Pence, I would never vote for him, said a guy named Matt, because I agreed to only refer to them by their first name.
Well, no reason.
He would be a horrible president. I don't think he has the leadership qualities to be president. That's exactly it, a woman named Christine said, nodding eagerly. Surprised her name wasn't Karen. He didn't have the leadership qualities to do what everyone wanted him to do on January 6th. He doesn't have the spine. And a third participant, Nicholas, chimed in. He just chose to go along with all the other rhinos and Democrats and not upset the apple cart. Yeah. And meanwhile, less MAGA-inclined Republicans thought Pence was too Trumpy.
All right.
Right. Barbara said, the only thing I liked about him is he actually did stand up to Donald Trump. I don't think Trump has a chance, and I don't think anybody in that inner circle has a chance either. Another participant, Justin, said, remember, these are Republicans. I think he put a stain on himself for any normal Republican when he joined the Trump administration, and then he put a stain on himself with any Trump Republican on January 6th. So I don't think he has a constituency anywhere. I don't know if anybody would vote for him.
Right. Though neither fish nor fowl.
Right? Sarah Longwell, who we've covered on the show before, she does these focus groups and also writes at Bulwark. Sarah Longwell told me this is how Pence is talked about in every focus group she holds. What to make of that 6 to 7% he gets in the primary polls? I imagine there's a cohort of GOP voters who aren't particularly engaged, who don't want Trump again. Pence is the only other name they know, and they're all from Indiana.
The whole focus group wasn't in Indiana, though. I mean,
no, it was all over the place.
Wow.
A second Republican
That's
pollster
crazy.
who requested anonymity to offer his candid view told me 7% is pretty weak showing for the immediate former VP.
Yes, to say the least. That's funny that they were all from Indiana, and they all thought they meant Gary Pence.
Yeah,
So we're for the other Pence.
we're for the other Pence.
All right. Well,
We're all for Gary.
I don't know what to tell
Indiana.
you. Right. I can't. I don't know what motivates a guy like that. I mean, I guess he just figures I was vice president. That's supposed to mean I'm a leading contender.
Devin
I mean,
O'Malley, an
read
advisor
your
to
own
Pence,
history,
said
man.
Mike Pence has spent the last 2 years traveling to more than 30 states where he can't find anybody to give him a sufficient
That's why
second.
he's traveled to so many states.
Right? We place more value in these experiences than of a focus group conducted
Greg
by
Pence
disgruntled former Republicans like Sarah Longwell, which is an accurate description, by the way, and paid for by some shadow organization that the Atlantic won't disclose. Well, it's the Bulwark.
Yeah.
And also the
there you
Republican
go.
Accountability
Disclosed it.
Project. If you ask her, she'll tell you who pays for it.
But you have to ask.
What I found who cares?
I don't know.
If you care, you can ask her.
Right. I mean, I think
What
that's
I found
okay
most
to
fascinating
ask.
about the voters' digs at Pence was they were almost always preceded by, he's a nice guy, he's kind of honest and decent, and he sucks.
Yeah. All right. Good. By the way, yeah, I said Gary Pence, and that's why you said Gary Indiana. It's Greg Pence, is what I was thinking. His brother. Maybe I thought that people might have thought they had a favorable impression of that guy, but how could you?
Well,
if you can't
I
remember his
did,
name?
but I thought his name was Gary.
Yeah, right.
And I'm from
Gregor.
Indiana. Now that I know his name
Pence.
is Greg and he's brother of Mike, not so much.
Yeah. Well, even Greg doesn't
Anyway,
support
so
Mike.
McKay Coppin says a very interesting thing. You're running
Now he's
for
gonna do
president.
something? Yes.
Ralph Reed says, if you're Mike Pence and you believe what you believe because you know God had a plan
Uh-huh.
back in the day, back
Yeah.
in the 2017 day. But in creating a permission structure for voters to excuse Trump's defective character and flouting of religious values, by bringing Mike Pence on the team, and Pence is obviously a devout Christian, and therefore it must be okay. If Pence says it's okay, that sort of thing. Pence was unwittingly making himself irrelevant. In effect, he spent 4 years convincing conservative Christian voters that the very thing he, Pence, had to offer didn't matter.
Okay.
In 2011, a poll by PRRI found that only 30% of white evangelicals believed an elected official who commits an immoral act can behave ethically and fulfill their duties in the public and professional life. Probably had Bill Clinton in mind.
Okay.
By 2020, that number had risen from 30 to 68%. So Pence won the argument, says McKay Coppin. Now he's reaping the whirlwind.
Okay. And there's just not much to be reaped, I guess.
Right.
Wow.
So
Mike Pence sucks.
he speaks to a devout Christian named Angie,
Oh.
and she had a list, and was asked how much she factored in moral rectitude when assessing a presidential candidate. And she said, I try to use my faith to choose somebody by character,
Yeah.
but it doesn't always work.
Like I chose Trump that one time.
Sometimes exactly. Sometimes I have to vote for a candidate who shares politics but doesn't live values. And who comes to mind? Trump.
Yeah, all right.
But quite honestly, the vast majority of other people do too. I would say Pence actually doesn't fall in this category. I would say his character probably aligns with biblical values.
Mm-hmm.
But
Maybe.
I'm not really interested in seeing him in the Oval Office.
Okay. I mean, there's...
But he seems like a perfectly nice man, she added.
Okay. I mean,
And there you have it.
seems
That's the
legit.
whole article.
All right, that's the best he does. He seems like a nice man that I don't want to be president. And I assume that means that he somehow won nomination and was presented, and Angie got presented with two perfectly nice people, one of whom was a Democrat, one who was a Republican. She'd probably vote for Pence. But as we know, that's not how it works, and you got to win the primary first. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad for him.
And we'll end this segment with a nice little piece from The Atlantic. The title kind of says it all.
Yeah.
First line, maybe. If they can come for Trump, they can come for everyone.
All right.
Which is good.
Yeah, I mean, that's called no one's above the law, I believe.
Right.
Is how we
Representative
used to say
Andy Biggs said there's massive fraud in the 2020 presidential election, blamed Antifa. But
wrong.
Biggs got one thing right in a tweet this weekend responding to former President Trump's prediction he'd be arrested. If they can come for Trump, they can come for you. He's right.
Yeah, you
that's
bet.
exactly the point. So
Anytime you murder,
don't do January 6th, okay, guys?
Right. Okay, Andy Biggs has realized that we have a legal system. Terrific.
You know, stop clock and all that.
Yeah.
Still right twice a day?
Mm-hmm. I guess, unless it has AM, PM on it.
Yeah.
In which case, it's only one once. This was from
Andy
the
Biggs
analog
isn't
clock
even from
days.
Indiana.
Oh, right. That's true. Well, you know, I don't know what to tell you about that. That's been a line that they use all the time, as if it was a terrible thing for people to realize if I do crimes, they could come for me. But I think everybody knew that, but I guess Andy Biggs didn't. Probably means he's been doing some crimes, and you should go after him at some point. Okay.
So we're almost at hearing music to tell us to stop.
Yes, right.
And I would point out in the last few seconds here, Jim Jordan's making a huge mistake going after the Manhattan DA without even knowing whether or not Trump's going to be indicted and what the charges are.
Okay. In what?
Just makes him look like a flop sweat fool.
Well, I mean, he's doing then what DeSantis is doing, and that's a pretty good bet that you will look like a flop sweat fool doing what he's doing, no matter what is happening. It doesn't really make any difference. He doesn't need to position himself that way, but I guess he's still under Trump's thrall. So bad news. Thanks, Greg. See you tomorrow. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Time for us to figure out what we're going to do for the next hour. There's plenty, and we have some things at the ready. And some things not at the ready. How about that? Let's see where we are. What did I put this away for? Something from... oh, yes, right. Okay. Some clarification and I guess a little further information on what's going on legally with Trump and what and why and wherefore. ABC News has this report. I guess the latest development that has the development that led Greg to tell everybody that the attorneys had to answer within hours is related to this entry from ABC News. So, special counsel Jack Smith, in trying to get their case moving very quickly through the D.C. courts. This is what was before Judge Beryl Howell, who we note for the record has ended her term as the D.C. District Courts, that's the trial level courts, as chief judge, and there's now a new chief judge, but I guess she'll continue to preside over this case, presumably, just because it's always been before, but just not as chief. It's not entirely clear whether the new chief wants to take over this stuff or whether it's tradition, practice, or rule, for that matter, for the chief judge to handle such cases. But for the moment, Beryl Howell remains on top of this case. But yeah, the details of why things are moving as quickly as they are, and the details of why the attorney-client privilege that Trump initially claimed would prevent Evan Corcoran from having to testify in the Mar-a-Lago documents case is being thrown out. So we'll just run down the details of this one Just to make sure everybody understands it, prosecutors in the special counsel's office have presented compelling preliminary evidence that former President Donald Trump knowingly and deliberately misled his own attorneys, as he is known to have done in the past, about his retention of classified materials after leaving office. A former top federal judge, she's still a top federal judge, but no longer the top judge on this court, wrote on Friday in a sealed filing, according to sources who described its contents to ABC News, which means we're not supposed to have this information yet, but we do because, well, ultimately because leak. But the fact remains, this appears, if this report is correct, this is what the court is holding about this. And since they've been required to respond so quickly, all indications are that this report is correct. U.S. Judge Beryl Howell, who on Friday stepped down as the D.C. District Court's chief judge, wrote last week that prosecutors in Special Counsel Jack Smith's office had made a prima facie showing, that is, on its face, it is clear that they have shown that the former president had committed criminal violations. That, according to these sources who have seen this sealed ruling, and that attorney-client privilege, as a result, attorney-client privilege invoked by two of his lawyers could therefore be pierced, that is to say, set aside, and they could be compelled to testify regardless of their claims of privilege. Trump has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, of course, in his handling of classified documents. In her sealed filing, Howell ordered that Evan Corcoran, an attorney for Trump, should comply with the grand jury subpoena for testimony on 6 separate lines of inquiry over which he had previously asserted attorney-client privilege. Sources added that Howell also ordered Corcoran to hand over a number of records tied to what Howell described as Trump's alleged, quote, criminal scheme, echoing prosecutors. Those records include handwritten notes, invoices, and transcriptions of personal audio recordings. Lordy, there are tapes. In reaching the so-called prima facie standard to pierce Corcoran's privilege, Howell agreed prosecutors made a sufficient showing that on its face would appear to show Trump committed crimes. I'm emphasizing some of this here for you. The judge made it clear that prosecutors would still need to meet a higher standard of evidence in order to seek charges against Trump, and more still, of course, to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, we're dealing with bar that rises as the jeopardy increases, right? In order for a judge to say, yes, I think prosecutors have shown enough for us to go to trial, or in this case, an even higher, a different kind of problem. Do we think we can compel his attorneys to testify? And the answer is, well, have you shown is there a prima facie evidence showing that a crime has been committed here and that the attorney either knew about it or should have known about it, but for the client's or whoever's interference at this stage? The answer is yes. The evidence appears to show that this must be the case. There's no other logical explanation for what happened here, and so therefore the attorney-client privilege is pierced and you must testify. Then later on, there will be, is there probable cause to charge him for these crimes? Yeah, by the way, I think they've also already shown that. And then, of course, if he's put on trial for it, has the evidence demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt that he meets the standard for guilt under the statute? And that's the question we're all waiting to find out. But the answer is yes for that, too. But anyway, there'll be a whole case presented before we get to that. It is a lower hurdle, but it is an indication that the government had presented some evidence and allegation that they had evidence that met the elements of a crime. Brandon Van Grack, I feel like we've heard his name before, a former top national security official in the Justice Department who is now in private practice, told ABC News. Howell found that prosecutors showed sufficient evidence that Trump intentionally concealed the existence of additional classified documents from Corcoran, sources said, putting Corcoran in an unwitting position to deceive the government. Corcoran, you'll recall, is the attorney who prepared the, I can't remember now who prepared and who signed, but I think it was he prepared the document that said that we've done a diligent search for additional materials and found none. And for whatever reason, maybe because he knew that to be untrue, or maybe because he suspected it to be untrue, maybe he's just a chicken. He had Christina Bobb actually sign it, right? Christina Bobb had the presence of mind to sign it in a form that says, look, to the best of my knowledge, I understand this diligent search to have been made, but it's entirely, basically the unwritten part. It's entirely possible that everybody's been lying to me, but she's not the one being pushed to testify at this stage, and it's not her attorney-client privilege that has to be pierced at this point either. And the real question is, what did Evan Corcoran actually know? Did he have reason to believe that he was being deceived or not? And I guess there's been a showing that was sufficient for Judge Howell to show, well, he knew or should have known that he was being manipulated at this point, and he's just going to have to testify because it seems pretty clear that, one, that he was deceived, and two, that at some point prior to today, he has come to that realization. And Trump does this to his lawyers all the time. I mean, we've read on the show before about how he has, about how his lawyers in the past have said, never meet with him alone, not only because he'll lie to you and manipulate you, but because you'll want to have another attorney present as a witness to what he tells you, because he'll tell you something that's not true and set you up for serious problems, either legally or ethically, later on down the road by pulling the rug out from underneath you and then swearing that he either didn't tell you that thing or that he told you something different. And you'll need a witness from in the room to testify to the fact that he told you the BS the first time. And that's just his usual MO. So I guess the courts are pretty well aware of this now. So where are we? Howell found that prosecutors showed sufficient evidence that Trump intentionally concealed the existence of additional classified documents from Corcoran, putting Corcoran in an unwitting position to deceive the government. He doesn't have to know that he's in on it, although it's likely that they might be able to prove that as well. They just don't need to in order to compel his testimony. The charge here is that Trump lied to both the FBI, who were investigating whether or not he had documents, and to his lawyers, whom he instructed to certify for the FBI that they had looked for and made a diligent search for other materials and found none. And it's an additional charge that Trump lied to his lawyers that they would put out a document that under normal circumstances would dissuade the FBI from having to look any further, because normally they can trust, well, if not their usual suspects, then certainly a former president of the United States. It's, I think, assumed that the FBI would take their word for it if they made a legal and binding representation that they had done this search, but they realize it's Donald Trump and that there's pretty good chance that it's a lie in this document. And so now the question is, did Corcoran lie, or did Corcoran just tell the FBI what their client told them to? And then I guess later on you could ask in a separate proceeding, did Corcoran really know that Trump was lying? We could get to that later in charging Corcoran. But for now, all we really want is if Corcoran is going to say, hey, I didn't know exactly what went on, but Trump told me that this has happened and I prepared that document and he's a liar and I got screwed, they'd be happy to have that testimony because they could use that as foundation for charging Trump with more crimes and more wrongdoing. And to the extent that Corcoran will admit to that, great. To the extent that he won't, well, it just becomes fodder for them to charge Corcoran later. So it's up to you, Evan, what you want people to do with this. And it is unclear what evidence Howell may have reviewed under seal from both DOJ and Trump's attorneys to help her arrive at this decision. In response to ABC News, a Trump campaign spokesperson who's not supposed to be have any specific knowledge of the legal case, said in part, "Shame on fake ABC News for broadcasting illegally leaked false allegations from a never Trump, now former chief judge against the Trump legal team." I like that they say that. One, that she's now the former chief judge. Yeah, well, he's now the former president. That by itself doesn't make him any less credible, but they put that in there as though she were being forced to step down because of ethical issues or something. No, she retired. All right. So anyway, the real story here is that fake ABC News should be reporting on is that prosecutors only attack lawyers when they have no case whatsoever, the spokesperson said, who's probably not a lawyer and doesn't know anything. What it is really going on here is that they are attacking lawyers only to make it clear to the lawyer that if you stand in defense of this terrible thing that this guy did, you will be charged too. Do you want that to happen, or do you want the focus to be on the client and only charging the client? Because the client lied to you and screwed you over. Do you want to go down for that, or do you want to send them up for it? And it's up to you. Tell me. A spokesperson of the special counsel's office declined to comment to ABC News, and that's ordinarily the case. The developments described by sources illustrate another dimension of the former president's ongoing legal vulnerabilities. As Smith's classified documents probe marches forward, prosecutors in New York, as you know, mulling a separate indictment against Trump over hush payments for Stormy Daniels, plus, of course, the case in Georgia over his efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election from down there, not to mention the cases that will be brought against him by Jack Smith for trying to overturn the 2020 election up here in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Central to Smith's efforts in the classified documents probe is determining whether lawyers who represented the former president falsely certified in response to a grand jury subpoena that Trump had returned all classified records to the government, or whether Trump himself sought to conceal records that he might have unlawfully retained. You remember the situation. They found that he had classified documents wrongly, and they said, "Do you have any more? Tell me," under penalty of perjury and several other charges as well. "Do you have any more documents, or do you not? Tell the FBI. Do we have to search you, or do we not have to search you?" "No, you don't have to search me. I don't have any more documents." And then, of course, they said, well, it's Donald Trump. We don't believe him. There's various reasons for that. They searched. They find 100 more documents. So now the question is, did you lie? Did you tell your attorneys to lie? Did you tell your attorneys, "I'm telling the truth, write this down," but you knew it was a lie? Did they know it was a lie? We got to clear that up. And Beryl Howell says the only way to do it, and you have every reason to try, ask Evan Corcoran, what does he have to say about this thing? He may very well go in there and lie for Donald Trump, but he's going to have to do it and put himself on the record and put himself in legal jeopardy by doing so. If he says, "Trump didn't tell me to do that," but they can prove that Trump did tell him to do that, fine. Then we had a perjury charge for Evan Corcoran too. If he says, "I don't want that headache," and he says, "Yeah, I know. Trump asked me not to tell you that he told me to do that, but he did tell me to do that," then we had the charge against Trump. That's fine. Somebody's getting charged here. Evan Corcoran gets to decide who gets that charge. And in doing so, it doesn't necessarily mean that Trump won't also be charged in the end anyway. Even if you take the rap, Evan, you should be aware of that. Federal prosecutors have claimed that lawyers for Trump certified in June of 2022 that a, quote, diligent search of Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate turned up just 38 classified documents stored in a storage room that was secured. But 2 months later, when FBI agents raided the premises, they found more than 100 additional documents marked classified, some of which were located outside of that storage room, including in Trump's office desk. You already know about that. In her order last Friday, Howell was unsparing in her criticism of Trump's actions since early last year in response to the government's attempts to retrieve all those classified documents taken from the White House. At one point, she described Trump's interactions with officials from the National Archives as a, quote, dress rehearsal, sources said, for his later efforts at misdirection in response to the grand jury subpoena. As ABC News previously reported, investigators sought to compel the testimony of Corcoran and other Trump attorneys like Jennifer Little, about whom I know nothing, as part of their probe, citing the crime fraud exception, which allows for attorney-client privilege to be pierced in cases where it is suspected that legal services were rendered in the commission of a crime. In case you forgot what that crime fraud exception was all about, the reason it's being pierced is there is reason to believe that the lawyer who's claiming to be covered by the privilege was in fact committing a crime, not actually permissibly representing their client. Yes, Evan Corcoran, you're suspected of a crime. Clear this up for us. Did you do the crime, or were you forced to do the crime by your client, or did he hide something for you, making it look like you committed a crime? Which one is it? Jennifer Little, I don't think I've ever heard the name, but as it turns out, she too is having her attorney-client privilege claims thrown out under the crime fraud exception too. So the first time you've made the paper, Jennifer Little, it is because you're a little more criminal than attorney, it seems, or at least in the view of the court at the moment. You're being given a chance to clear up the record for yourself as well. So let's see, where were we? Sources told ABC News that Howell ordered Little's testimony as well, with the exception of one of the topics for which she sought to assert attorney-client privilege. She might be right on that one. Sources said prosecutors have sought to question Corcoran on how he aided another Trump attorney, Christina Bobb, in drafting the June 2022 statement to the Justice Department, which Bobb ultimately signed. Attorneys for Trump were expected to appeal Howell's Friday ruling, sources said. And that's the end of the ABC News coverage of it, but that's not the last word on it. They did appeal, and the appeals court said, yeah, we're tired of your delays. We know what you're doing. Beryl Howell has it right. If you have shocking information that shows that she's actually got it wrong, you got a couple of hours to show it to us. But this doesn't require any more research or any more thinking or any more theorizing. This is cut and dried. You either did or didn't do it. Tell us what the situation is within a couple of hours. Then we'll give Jack Smith a couple more hours to respond. That time is now come and gone. They're not taking any nonsense at this point, at least on this question. They may take further nonsense later. They reserve the right to do that. Okay. So, well, that's pretty interesting. And I don't know what else to tell you about it. Okay. All right. Let's see. A couple other things to share here, and just a few more minutes in this segment to do it, but another segment later on that'll give us more time. Which direction to go then? How about we... maybe I'll save. I've got another segment here from Rosalind McGregor updating us on what's going on in Michigan, and it's been a while, and she actually filed this with us Thursday of last week, and then we had all this stuff to do, and I'm thinking maybe it's a Good Friday kind of piece, or not good, I always make the same joke, and it's coming around to that time of year when we have to worry about whether we're talking about actual capital G, capital F Good Friday, or the lowercase g kind of Good Friday. But I don't know, Friday's become the long read time. I don't know. All right, well, I'll tell you what. Maybe we'll catch up with it. What time is it now? 10:21. Yeah, we might actually have time to roll this because she tends to limit herself to about 4 minutes. Why don't we do that? And then we'll make the last segment about some of the long read stuff. Okay, where did I file this thing? Here we are. Are you ready, Rosalind? I know, I'm putting you on the spot, but luckily you actually pre-recorded this. This could make this sound like, Rosalind, quick, get in here, report. Okay. Because the footsteps. I don't know. I don't have any good footsteps. So I guess I could stomp my feet. All right. Now you're down to a couple less minutes. Can you make it work? Yes, I can, says Rosalind. And so here she goes.
Good morning, David.
Good morning,
I have another
Rosalind.
installment about the west side and traditionally conservative side of Michigan for your listeners. Today we start in Berry County. Longtime listeners may remember Berry County in the news after the county sheriff, Dar Leaf, launched his investigation and lawsuits to prove tampering in the 2020 election. He also made news after public statements in support of the fellows convicted of the kidnapping attempt on Governor Gretchen Whitmer. I'd like to direct your attention to this news piece from the local Grand Rapids TV station about a school fundraiser. Quote, a small West Michigan school is raising eyebrows over an upcoming fundraiser in which 8 guns will be raffled off, an event that organizers say brings in tens of thousands of dollars. Berry County Christian School's 3rd annual Sporting Clay Shoot fundraiser is set for May 6th at the Caledonia Sportsman's Club in Alto. The event includes a clay shoot and pistol competition, a cornhole tournament, lunch, and several guns that will be raffled off. We've got an awesome gun board, said Brandon Strong, the executive director of Berry County Christian Education Association. There's a custom AR-15 made by a shop not too far from here. We've got a couple of handguns, a couple of shotguns. There's a variety of stuff for everyone. Strong said they raised more than $20,000 from last year's event. The money went to help supplement tuition costs for families in need. We allow people of any kind of socioeconomic background to attend our school, and about 35% of those don't pay full price, he said. So this event is really about being able to allow kids that maybe couldn't afford private Christian education to be able to afford it. One person who declined to speak on camera said that they, quote, thought it was very inappropriate for a school to have this type of fundraiser regardless of who is doing it, end quote. Strong said that while they have received several objections to their fundraiser, he invites everyone out to see what it's all about. We do everything as far as the federal firearms license and the state raffles. People want to win things that they're interested in, and there seems like a lot of people who are interested in winning guns, he said. This article leads into a recent story about Kent and Ottawa counties and their GOP leaders. And I quote, 2 West Michigan Republican organizations are urging local politicians to declare Kent and Ottawa counties Second Amendment sanctuaries. Just weeks after 3 students were killed in a mass shooting in Michigan State University, Republican Party leaders in Kent and Ottawa counties released resolutions urging protection of gun rights. The Executive Committee of the Kent County Republican Party and the Republican Party for the County of Ottawa released nearly identical resolutions stating, following unconstitutional gun hijacking legislation by the Democrat-controlled majority in Lansing, the County Republican Party vigorously passed a resolution calling for protection of voter rights under the Second Amendment. The resolution states it is the natural God-given right of the people to possess and bear arms, and calls upon the county board of directors, the county sheriff, and the county attorney at law to express their support. Declare for the Second Amendment rights of all county citizens as protected by the United States Constitution. Meanwhile, Democratic lawmakers in both Lansing and Washington, D.C. are calling for stricter gun regulations in the wake of the mass shooting at MSU. Michigan Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks told reporters the Michigan Senate will soon take action on gun violence legislation. Some of the policies Democrats have called for are universal background checks, red flag laws, and safekeeping requirements. Just a reminder that the populations of Ottawa, Kent, and Berry counties are very majority white, with a long tradition of proudly held Dutch Christian conservatism. That's my time for today. Back to you, David. Rosalind McGregor signing off.
Okay, thanks, Rosalind. And yeah, a familiar theme. We've seen this before, and usually inappropriately timed, because anything like this would be inappropriately timed because we're constantly having mass shootings, of course. The idea of raffling off guns in general, but an AR-15 in particular, is so in such close proximity, one, to a recent mass shooting, and usually a school-based mass shooting, and in this case they have one right there in Michigan, and 2, doing this was a school fundraiser. Like, we're going to raise money for the schools by giving away an AR-15, which stands a reasonable chance of actually being used in a school shooting on which we're spending plenty of money trying to prevent or mitigate damage by adding security features, et cetera, and it seems like kind of a self-defeating feedback loop. But, you know, more to the point really is the messaging that goes out. But in conservative areas, I mean, the guy, whoever he is, has a certain point. Yes, if you're going to raffle something off and you want to raise money, you're going to want to raffle off something that people seem to be interested in. What's interesting to me is, I mean, he's right. People are interested in guns, and that'll get them to spend money on the raffle. But you know what? It'd be interesting, just funny in that sense. Why not raffle off a Bible and then point out the fact that I don't understand why people are so much less interested in getting a hold of God's own word rather than a gun, which I don't know why it is that's so much more popular with people than the word of peace, such as it may be. But I don't know. Then they would just say, yargle bargle, reasons, get out of my face, or I'm going to shoot you. And that'd be that. Also interesting was their gobbledygook wording of not their radio show, it's the gobbledygook I'm talking about, but their resolution. One, the protection of voter rights under the Second Amendment. There aren't any voter rights in the Second Amendment, of course, but they just want to conflate everything, as they frequently do. And then, of course, the notion that it's all God-given rights. Well, we've been over that before. All right, still nonsense. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Many directions we could go here. I wasn't necessarily planning on this one, but for continuity's sake, perhaps we'll continue on the Second Amendment theme just for a moment. I have here at the ready from Paul Waldman, no relation, except that we keep saying no relation a lot. That's our relationship. I've got this piece from, Monday. What a new Second Amendment could look like. Of course, in all likelihood, it will look like nothing because it's not entirely likely that we would see it anytime soon. But, things could change. Really, he offers this up on the premise that things have changed after all. And so why couldn't change run in the other direction? And they certainly could. What's he talking about here? 2.5 months into 2023, he begins, there have been more than 110 mass shootings in the United States. That's a problem. And more than 8,700 overall gun deaths, according to the Gun Violence Archive. Rather than that creating a sense of emergency in our nation's legislatures and courts, we're seeing quite the opposite. The most extraordinary court-driven rollback of laws meant to reduce gun violence we've seen. Last year, the Supreme Court handed down its ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, B-R-U-E-N, in which or maybe Bruin, I don't know, did I say Bruin? Makes it sound like UCLA, but it isn't. In which Justice Clarence Thomas, of all people, declared that for any contemporary gun regulation to be constitutional, the government would have to identify historical analog. That's the quote. An historical analog to it from the nation's founding. This is a weird and somewhat novel version of original intent type legal theory that he expounds here. And could be a launching pad for a larger discussion. Maybe it will be. But this is what he says, right? Any contemporary gun regulation, in order for it to be constitutional, the government has to identify a historical analog to it from the nation's founding. The result has been a transformation in U.S. gun law that is producing far more chaos than expected and leading to outcomes far more divorced from the public will than anyone predicted. Let's look at just a few of the many gun cases that have been decided in recent months following the Bruen decision. And there are a couple of bullet-pointed items here. In West Virginia, a judge struck down a law prohibiting the possession of guns whose serial numbers have been removed. That's been illegal since forever, but not anymore in West Virginia. In Texas, a judge struck down a law barring those under 21 from carrying handguns. And again, in each case, remember the precedent here is from Bruen, in which Clarence Thomas gave them basically the reasoning. Well, there can't be a law prohibiting the possession of guns whose serial numbers have been removed because in the founders' day, they didn't have serial numbers on the guns. And so therefore, that's original intent. There can be no accounting for changes in practice or technology. Whatever was happening in 1787 is all there ever will be, with respect to guns and guns only, apparently. Another judge in Texas struck down a law barring those under felony indictments from buying guns. There were, of course, felonies in 1787, but no law saying that those convicted of felonies couldn't possess firearms, and so therefore no changes allowed. A judge in New Jersey struck down a law preventing people from taking guns to libraries and bars. An appeals court somewhere else ruled that the federal law barring those under domestic violence restraining orders from possessing guns is unconstitutional under the same principle. That's not something they said in 1787. There's a revolution happening in the courts right now. Adam Winkler, UCLA law professor and author of Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America, told me, that would be Paul, not me, the lower courts are striking down gun laws left and right. Now, this isn't to say that gun rights forces are winning every last case. Notably, a recent appeals court decision upheld another state law, this time in Florida, barring people from buying a gun under the age of 21. But the gun rights movement is winning a lot more these days, and as Winkler says, the gun laws that are being struck down are really surprising. While courts look to history on many questions, law professors I spoke to agreed that in no other area does the Supreme Court say the evaluation of a regulation's constitutionality begin and end with asking whether it's sufficiently similar to what was in place in 1791. Not 1787. That's the beginning of the convention. 1791 being the ratification of their work. Good point. Bruen doesn't offer a formula, by the way, for how to apply history, leaving judges to do almost whatever they please. Sounds like good law, right? Which for conservatives may be precisely the point. If all you need to do is find a quote from a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses or a 1750 code in a tiny village in New York to support your position, you can rule just about any way you like. But as Joseph Blocher, B-L-O-C-H-E-R, Blocher, and as opposed to Blocher, I suppose, of Duke Law School told me, you can stare at the historical record for as long as you want and never find a precise answer to whether, say, the government can stop you from bringing a gun on an airplane. Blocher added, this can't mean that the government is precluded from passing those laws, right? In 1791, they would never have said you can't bring a gun on an airplane because there were no airplanes. That can't mean that the founders meant for us never to legislate what goes on airplanes. In the broadest terms, says Blocher, the pre-Bruen settlements actually did reflect where most Americans are on guns. Clear majorities support universal background checks, red flag laws that allow guns to be taken from people who pose a danger to others, and licensing requirements to own a handgun. But any or all such measures could now potentially be declared unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has effectively rewritten the Second Amendment in ways that the vast majority of Americans, even gun owners, disagree with. But if we're going to rewrite the Second Amendment, the second time, I guess, we should do it through the normal constitutional process and establish one that works for the contemporary world. But the problem, of course, is the judicial conservatives, the original intent people, the strict constructionists, the ones who are opposed to legislating from the bench, are in fact legislating from the bench. Now, that's not what the other Waldman is saying. That's what this Waldman is saying. I'm adding that paragraph to it. So don't blame Paul for that one. You know he would likely agree. Now, back to Paul's commentary. After all, even the Bruin justices will find that their latest test takes them to places they don't want to go, Winkler predicts. For instance, he argues, the fact that we didn't ban felons from possessing firearms in the 1700s and 1800s won't lead conservatives to strike down current laws banning this. Instead, Winkler says the court will likely uphold those laws while struggling to maintain some charade of historical analysis. The National Constitution Center made an attempt to rewrite the Constitution some time ago. Their conservative, liberal, and libertarian experts came up with dramatically different answers on what a new Second Amendment would look like. Yet only the libertarians wanted virtually unlimited gun rights of the kind the court is now creating, or courts rather, up and down the scale here. Even the conservatives' version made room for restrictions. A new Second Amendment would have to include two ideas: that there is an individual right to own guns for self-defense, as conservatives believe. And remember, it used to be, before Bruin, there were plenty of articles about the court rewriting the Second Amendment, and they meant Heller, the D.C. versus Heller decision, in which, for the first time in 200 plus years, the Supreme Court actually said, yes, there is an individual right to go about armed for self-defense. They were never willing to just come straight out and say that, because it ain't in there. And as weirdly worded as the Second Amendment is, there's nothing in there that says anything about individual self-defense. The only mention is militia purposes. But what the hell? Who cares? Let's just add it, because we don't legislate from the bench. All right, so there would conservatives would, of course, insist that a new Second Amendment include that, and that the right is subject to reasonable restrictions to protect public safety, as liberals emphasize. These are the ones, of course, who would be pointing out, well, it isn't a handheld instant death machine. Shouldn't there be some kind of regulation? People have the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but all of that can be revoked. It's not the government action that's doing it directly, but shouldn't we have some sort of restriction on the supposed right of some people, possibly crazy people, possibly super dangerous people, to just end other people's lives arbitrarily? I think so. In practice, there would be some limits on who can have guns, where you can bring them, and what kinds of guns you can own. As much as we might disagree about how it would work in practice, which, after all, is what we do on every constitutional right, if we could agree on both of these ideas, no matter how reluctantly, we could begin to imagine an eventual consensus on the foundation for a saner gun regime. To a degree, this was the situation introduced by the court's decision in District of Columbia versus Heller, that established an individual right to bear arms under the Constitution while leaving room for substantial regulation. Bruin wiped away that framework entirely. So we've been spending the last, I don't remember how long it's even been, on D.C. versus Heller, although it's linked here. Maybe it was going to give me the date of the case somewhere that I can find it quickly and move on. Yes, 2007. So we're talking about coming up on the 20th anniversary in 4 years. So 16 years, I guess, since we learned that now the Supreme Court considers there to be an individual right to bear arms for personal self-protection, going about armed at all times in public, versus remaining or being permitted to own firearms with the idea in mind that you might have to serve in the local militia at some point. The militia being necessary to the maintenance of a free state, etc., etc. But nothing about you protecting yourself from people you fear for whatever reason, good or bad, in there. But again, even that case then still said, well, okay, there's an individual right to bear arms at all times, but that doesn't mean it's without restriction. there can be reasonable restrictions placed. What makes a restriction reasonable? Well, that's for us to figure out later on when we have to legislate that from the bench. All right. Well, anyway, we've been wringing our hands over this for 16 years, saying, well, we need to get some better idea of what's a reasonable restriction. And lo and behold, it doesn't matter that we haven't settled on it, because Bruin says even that might be out the window. There might be no such thing as a reasonable restriction, because the restriction would have to have been in existence in 1790, and it never was, so therefore no restrictions are reasonable under that view. Except, who made up that view? Clarence Thomas. More on that in a second. At the moment, we live under a radical new version of the Second Amendment, one driven by a vision of almost unlimited gun proliferation. The result would be profound and tragic. We shouldn't stop imagining something better. That's true, but for the time being, all we have is what's worse. And speaking of what's worse, Paul Waldman wrote earlier that's a link to the same thing. All right, I thought it was Paul Waldman, but I have to scroll a little bit further back here. I saw the Clarence Thomas reference and clicked on it. But speaking of what's worse, how far back do I have to go for this one? Is it really this far? I feel like I might have gone too far already, but somewhere in here, there we go. Slate, and it's Dahlia Lithwick, and it's always worth checking in with Dahlia. This I've been holding for a long time. Now it makes sense. Now it can be told. February 15th, 2023. It's not that far back. And Dahlia Lithwick is just one of the writers on the byline, the other being Heidi Lee Feldman. Lee being L-I, by the way, in case you wanted to look it up. And timely, to say the least. Let's stop pretending Clarence Thomas can read the framers' minds. Yes, please. It's about time. And I don't even know if she was thinking. Yes, she was, as a matter of fact. No wonder we're back here. But, there's a limited number of cases we could be talking about if Clarence Thomas is the one we're talking about writing the majority opinion. So stands to reason that it would be the same thing. But even without that being the case, we would want to read this and analogize to it. But now we don't have to make an analogy. There's a direct comparison. The majority of our current Supreme Court justices, they write, worry that the Second Amendment does not get the respect it deserves. Oh, my God. There are people writing resolutions and Republican Party resolutions out in Michigan now calling it that the Second Amendment is a God-given right. That sounds like it's getting the respect it deserves. Saying that there's a voter rights component somehow of the Second Amendment, which there really isn't. It sounds like it's getting too much respect. It's getting respect that it doesn't deserve. Well, they claim, the justices do, modern gun control laws wrongly prioritize efforts to curb gun violence over the individual's right to bear arms, which didn't even exist, really, until about 16 years ago. Impermissibly regulating, she says, the right, they say, to a second-class status, which I would analogize further to say, when we all roll our eyes every time one of these, not the justices per se, but other conservative activists say the most persecuted people in America are white Christians. Yeah, sure. And similarly, they claim the Second Amendment is the one that's most under attack, when it is in fact the most expanded and most ridiculously so of all of the enumerated rights of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, I would say. To ensure that legislatures and lower courts properly honor the Second Amendment, the High Court last year announced a new test for the validity of laws regulating gun possession and carrying. In New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the court declared that modern gun control laws must hew tightly to the Anglo-American tradition of firearms regulation, as that tradition stood in and around 1791, the year the Second Amendment was ratified. Invoking the litmus test laid down by Bruin, a panel of the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Can you tell me of a more radically right-wing Circuit Court of Appeals than that one? No, of course. They come up all the time, and they came up most recently in the context of the weirdo Texas single judge divisions of the federal courts that now feed their cases directly to the Fifth Circuit in order to ratify their craziness right away. All right. Invoking the litmus test laid down by Bruen, a panel of the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals recently invalidated a federal law aimed at keeping guns from those adjudicated, use the word right, adjudicated to be domestically abusive to their intimate partners. Judges, federal judges in some cases, saying, we adjudicate this, we find this to be the case, and they say, well, back in 1791, they probably would have changed their mind about that. We know nothing about this. According to the appellate judges in U.S. versus Rahimi, this law is too unlike any laws from the late 18th century to survive constitutional review. In other words, freezing the development of the legal system at 1791, any concepts that hadn't been introduced by that point, like emancipation of slaves, for instance, can no longer withstand constitutional scrutiny. These decisions and the reasoning that guides them are frightening and oppressive. They seem to force us to look down the wrong end of a temporal telescope so that we can see only the narrowest version of what the framers might have demanded of us. The Bruen approach further assumes that had those same framers had the ability to look ahead across time to our world, they could imagine only the most cramped future possible. But that is an interpretive choice, not an unassailable presumption. On closer examination, Rahimi itself ultimately reveals that judges can legitimately choose to see both our past and our present from a far more generous perspective, one the framers themselves might well have approved. Picking up a term that peppers Bruen, the Rahimi judges approached their job by asking whether this modern law, stripping adjudicated domestic abusers of their right to possess and carry weapons, would seem like an outlier to our ancestors. To fashion a reply, they undertook a survey. They diligently identified features of historical laws and features of the modern law. They itemized the features of the old laws missing from the current one and features of the new law absent from the old ones. From this inventory, the panel concluded that our ancestors would have deemed the current law an outlier. In essence, this panel performed an observational experiment. They collected and classified information, organizing what they observed. Not so bad so far, right? Then they looked for patterns in the data points. Their taxonomy made features of the current gun control law look like wild outliers compared to features of historical laws, but another experimenter, operating with another equally reasonable taxonomy, might have classified the law's features without yielding any outliers whatsoever. If, then, we are substituting judgment and reasoning for raw historical imitation, we should consider more broadly how our forebears from 1791 would have approached the question of whether a law regulating gun possession is an outlier compared to the laws of their time. We might even find ourselves able to imagine ratifiers of the Second Amendment gazing forward through the correct end of the telescope, envisioning a future in which laws precluded alleged domestic abusers from possessing firearms actually fits squarely within their vision of the amendment. Let's play it out. Hypothesize that one of our ancestors is presented with the contested domestic abuser provision of the Federal Gun Control Act. To parse the law's features, she might first want to understand what an intimate partner is. Why in our day we have legal procedures by which a person threatened by and afraid of an intimate partner might obtain a court order restraining that partner from contacting or coming near them. She might want to know how easily obtainable guns really are in America today. How much and what kinds of gun violence are perpetuated mostly by men. Our hypothetical ancestor might also find it useful to know about the decades-long drive by the gun industry and gun enthusiast organizations to ensure that state and federal governments would protect gun manufacturers from the reach of ordinary tort law, and how these organizations marshaled resources to persuade courts to reinterpret the Second Amendment as creating an individual right to own and use guns for personal self-defense. Bearing all this in mind, our ancestor from 1791 might well conclude that a legal system crafted to protect life and liberty should readily encompass the value of protecting people from being terrorized by gun possessors with a propensity to physically harm others. With knowledge of a 2023 in which mass shootings occur almost daily, often carried out by those with a history of terrorizing intimate domestic partners with guns, the hypothetical framer ancestor might be both baffled and horrified at the prospect of, quote, freedom in future generations, meaning that government could not stop the massacre of small children in schools because it turned out to be that the Constitution they drafted forbade virtually any regulation of guns. Of course, no counterfactual or hypothetical reconstruction of how people from the past might have approached or performed an intellectual task can predict what they certainly would have done. We do not have a way to run that thought experiment as an actual one, but we do have good reason to think that the founders of the United States, the ancestors whose reactions to our gun laws are of particular importance to today's courts and legislators, would have reasoned more like the imagined broad-thinking forebear than the circumscribed Rahimi judges. After all, we know quite a lot about how the founders approached historical analogical reasoning. They used it to argue that only a legislature to which colonists sent elected representatives could rightfully enact tax laws applicable to the colonies. To make this case, the founders analogized colonists to the Englishmen who had a right, according to the British Constitution, to elect their representatives to the legislature that imposed taxes. Not everybody bought that comparison. The British tradition of parliamentary representation excluded all manner of people from voting for those who enacted the taxes they paid. Many people in both America and the United Kingdom found the idea of elected representation for colonists utterly anomalous, as much an outlier as elected representation for paupers or for women, right? That's a good point. We can only have laws in the modern context that our ancestors of 1791 wouldn't have deemed to be an outlier without historical precedent. But of course, the entirety of the American experiment was an outlier without historical precedent. They were the first people declaring that people of right had the ability to and ought to be trusted with the opportunity to elect their own taxation authorities and representatives in the legislature. That was new. It was without precedent. And so, as it turns out, the Constitution is unconstitutional. And we actually have known that for quite some time. The establishment of the Constitution was, by some interpretations, an illegal and unsanctioned act entirely, right from the beginning. They were supposed to have convened to reform and reframe the Articles of Confederation, not to eliminate it and replace it. But they did anyway, which is weird because that would have been a historical anomaly. But anyhow, the founders operated with another taxonomy. They argued their claim on the basis of profoundly meaningful similarities between some colonists and some Englishmen that both were born free with inalienable rights to pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and that for both the purpose of government was to secure these rights, and that for both any government that consistently undermined these rights was illegitimate. These judgments of similarity propelled these founders to fight a war, establish new states, and then join these states together in a creative and innovative new form of government. Right from the founding, then, analogical reasoning was bold and aspirational as frequently as it was crabbed and limiting. The founders certainly had their intellectual and moral failings. They accepted and engaged in some horribly unjust and inhumane practices. Wink, wink. I think we know what they are. But whatever else they were, the founders were not lacking in imagination or the power of analogous reasoning. Nor did they seek to forever lash their descendants to the most cramped reading of democracy they could conjure. They thought creatively and capaciously, particularly about how history and tradition should be used to reason about justice, well-being, law, and government. They were looking out through a telescope to a broader and more complex future. This one vital fact seems to slip away when jurists make grandiose claims about original public meaning and the singular utility of dictionaries to forge justice. Yes, that's true, and one of their favorite tricks there. The issue raised by the Bruin test or the Raheny panel's approach is not ultimately even about originalism versus some other approach to constitutional interpretation, nor is it a matter of whether or not history and tradition rightly bear on adjudication, legislation, and legal thought. Of course they do, but they always have and they always will. The real issue raised by this new crabbed system of historical reasoning is the intellectual stance, temperament, and habits that lawyers, judges, and legislators should bring to the task of historical analogical reasoning. To resolve it, we could do worse than to look to the founders, who could certainly cherry-pick historical analogies with the best of them, but also understood the need to think broadly about law, freedom, and democracy. But if that's the case, then we shouldn't listen to them because, I don't know, reasons. Anyway, good point. Obviously, there's no real reason to believe that any justice, much less Thomas himself, and only Thomas apparently, would have any special insight into what the founders were thinking. They weren't thinking a great deal about there being a black justice, I can assure you of that. Anyway, time for us now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to bring you all the stories we may have missed, including, I don't know, maybe he's been indicted, maybe he hasn't. Justice has been keeping an eye on that. He can bring you up to date, and will right after this.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Here's an interesting esoteric story. The Ballona Creek Trash Interceptor near Playa del Rey, California, has spared the Pacific from hundreds of thousands of pounds of garbage during the recent storms. So good on them for that. That, plus probably stories of broader application as well. All next.